So very recently, the VFX Insider actually made a video on his interview with the actual Blur Studio, the studio that worked on the Unreal Tournament episode of The Secret Level. And one of the more interesting things about that episode and the things that they actually revealed to us was that they used Unreal Engine for it. And so, I mean, we have talked a lot about how powerful Unreal Engine really is, but they actually gave us a lot of more insider knowledge in terms of what we can do to make our own short films really good. And so with that said, let's begin the video. So one of the things that they mentioned about the Unreal Tournament episode of The Secret Level is that they actually used metahumans. And there has been a lot of mixed opinions about metahumans, because there have been people who say that metahumans don't look as good from a distance or so. But I think the part of the problem is that people don't actually customize metahumans. What I think is that metahumans should be used as a base. You shouldn't use that base metahuman and just download it for your final result. I think you can do a lot better if you try and actually customize and put in the effort to make the metahuman look more real. So what they did was that they actually made all custom textures and custom normal maps and even wrinkle maps in order to actually make their metahumans look absolutely amazing. And one of the very interesting things about this whole episode was that they not only used metahumans for the actual human characters, but they also used them for the robots. And it's quite interesting because if you really think about it, yes, the metahumans do have a potential of, being able to give really good expressions in humans, but you don't have to use expressions. You can just put a mask on top of your metahuman and you can still animate the body of the metahuman. And so the metahuman pipeline was really something that they used, and it really came in handy for them. What they did basically was that they used the DNA of metahumans and used that DNA to make their own custom characters and then take the advantage of the DNA of the metahumans. So yeah, I think that they really showed us how great metahumans can be. Now the second thing, which is the more important thing about this whole interview that we got from the Blur Studio, and the Blur Studio actually came forward and told us about this very clearly, was that they actually used Lumen Render Engine for their final result. And if you really look at the episode, I mean, I cannot stop smiling, but just imagine that the quality that they gave us was just as good as the other episodes. You know that the quality that they gave us was just as good, if not better, than the other episodes of The Secret Level. So even though they used Lumen, there was no lack of quality, no real problem with the episode. And I think that they really did an amazing job with the render settings of the Lumen, because by the way, they also gave us the render settings of Lumen. And so what I think that they did was that they worked around the limitations of Lumen and then also tried to fix those limitations in post-processing and compositing. And this is one of the best things that they told us, because if you really think about it, Lumen gives you 80% of the result that you desire, but you can actually get that to close to 95% if you just do good color grading and compositing. So yeah, that was one of the other things that they did, which was really good, by the way. Now, one of the only unfortunate things, and it might be unfortunate for some it might just be okay, is that they used a RTX 3090 to build the base scenery. And so yeah, as I have said before, one of the only disadvantages of using Unreal Engine is that Unreal Engine genuinely demands a lot more VRAM than the actual raw power of the graphic card. And this is where I think that there is an advantage as well, but there is also a disadvantage. The advantage is that you won't have to get a graphic card that has very high raw rendering performance, because let's be honest here, these days the graphic cards that have really high raw rendering performance are also very expensive. And so if you can manage to get a second-hand 3090, you might actually get a really good deal on it. And so yeah, while the hardware requirement is kind of a hit or miss, I do think that it's more or less gonna depend on the person who is making the scenery. I mean, ultimately you can still optimize your scenery to be good enough. And right now I'm also working with Lumen, and I only have a laptop with 6 GB of VRAM. So yeah, I have to optimize a lot. But with that said, I do think that the hardware requirement is the only thing that is kind of a hit or miss with the whole Unreal Engine for film production scenario. With that said, it's still pretty good to know that we can still get a lot of work done if only we have enough VRAM. If anything, this removes the limitation of using only Nvidia graphic cards, because if you can get your hands on some cheaper alternative of an AMD graphic card which has more VRAM, because generally speaking AMD even on lower end gives you more VRAM, then you can actually get just as good of a result, and that's pretty good. With this whole secret level and the animations that we saw in the episodes, the one thing that stood out to me in case of Unreal Tournament is that obviously, well, they use Unreal Engine, but what I think that their quality of animation wasn't the only thing that is impressive. They actually gave a good direction to the story, to the plot, and they made the whole animation kind of stylized. Yes, it was more photoreal, but at the same time it had its own aesthetic. Many of the other episodes actually had their own stylized look to approach the actual artwork, and I think that is where the power of Lumen really lies. You don't just have to make something that's photoreal. You can also make something that is stylized. This game recently that released called The Split Fiction, and those of you who have played that game would know that that game is also made on Unreal Engine, and it looks absolutely amazing. And you know what they did? They did not necessarily make their animation be higher in quality, but they approached the animation in the way that they focused more on stylism and story writing. And I've said this again and again, your animation doesn't have to be the best in render quality. If the story behind it is more convincing, then people are willing to look past the actual animation quality. I mean, let's talk about Invincible for a second. Invincible's animation is actually just mediocre. With that said, the story and the way the writers have told us the plot of Invincible makes the story convincing enough that you are willing to forgive the mediocre animation quality of most of the Invincible episodes. And so yeah, what I think that they did really good in Secret Level was that they achieved a kind of stylism. The reason why I found this whole Unreal Engine and the Unreal Tournament episode really interesting is because Blur Studio actually gave us indie artists the hope that we can actually make really good short films. I mean, think about it. Maybe you are not as big of a studio, maybe you don't have facilities of a studio, but if you just have enough VRAM on a graphic card, you might be able to churn out really good animations and really good projects. And this makes us indie artists very powerful, because yes, Blur Studio is a studio, but what they did is something that can be done with a very small team of people as well. So with that, I would like to conclude my video. I needed to talk about this Secret Level because I watched the episode and it's absolutely amazing. Before this, I wasn't watching the actual animation, I knew about it, but yeah, looking at the animation and them giving us the insider info that they only used a 3090 to render out the whole scenery, all in all, this gives us indie artists a hope. The hope that we don't have to actually invest tons and tons of money just to get something that looks mediocre. We don't have to have the best hardware, we don't have to have the best graphic card. We can work with what we have, and Lumen and Unreal Engine gives us hope for that. So yeah, I hope you have a good one.